good, the bad, and the ugly of 2022. So what was good? I mean, I think opening up after COVID was good. The fact that things were starting to hum again, coming back into life again, especially when you consider what's happening in China and places like that where it's still closed down. Now, what was bad? That COVID is still around and will continue to be around, and you don't know what the next variant might bring for you. And the ugly, I suppose what I found quite ugly was the fact that there was so much control. There seemed to be an extra amount of control, and that was partly because of COVID. It was supposed to keep us safe. But then there were other things that came through, a lot of uncertainty that came up as well as a result of many of the things that were not going as planned. Society and the economy has taken quite a beating, and we are looking at so many different issues. So that uncertainty can be quite a difficult situation for us to deal with, and can be quite ugly as well. So joining us today, we have P. Jeyaretnam, who has been running his company S&J Asia Pacific Ventures since 1994. The company undertakes management consultancy projects, mainly in strategic business development and marketing, venture capital, and rollout of companies that want to start up here. Khoo Swee Yong, who is the director and the key executive officer of International Property Advisor. Swee Yong has written 6 books on the property market. 1 more is coming. And he also lectures on the topic. In the context of today's discussion, it'll be great to try and get a sense of what, to each of you, were the good, the bad, and the ugly aspects of the year. Shall we start with you, Swee Yong?
Okay. Good thing is maybe it's also the end of the year. Things seem to have quietened down, and in conversations with analysts and investors, it seems that there's a little bit more realism and expectations are more muted now. And the best thing for me coming in the second half of the year is all those advertisements that I get on Facebook, YouTube, and Instagram, where there are people trying to teach me how to make money quickly using technical analysis or following Katie Wood's funds. But those things have all gone quiet. So now I'm enjoying social media a little bit more. On the bad side, of course, this year we thought that we would be getting into a full year of recovery. But then Omicron came first before the war, and subsequently then the crypto and several cases of fraud started to pop up, and the technology stocks got hit. Many of the funds got hit, and then strangely, interest rates started to spike up from second quarter of this year. Inflation came up, and famously, some of our senior guys said, "Oh, inflation is just a short-term blip, but look where it's gotten us now, is dragged and dragged." So on the real estate side, we are now getting a very nasty combination. So I'm focusing on the bad now. Nasty combination of inflation, which is increasing our MCST bills, management fee. Our energy costs, of course, have gone up also with inflation. The GST increase is coming up, so expect a few more contractors to be billing you with a little bit more charges. Property tax will go up next year, and then interest rates are suddenly, new home loans are at 3.5%, 4%, and there are many people who would be just taking out a larger chunk of their salary and their CPF to service all these increased costs. So that's the bad. And then what's for ugly? The ugliness I find is that it is getting more and more murky and more difficult to read the market. Data seems to be not congruent and very confusing, and it is impossible to forecast. So again, back to real estate, why is the residential market so resilient? Why are people still rushing to buy, despite the fact that in the last 3 years since COVID has happened, we have a decline of total population of 66,000 decline, but yet we had an additional total number of dwelling units built of 50,000 units. So we have got a headcount decline, additional physical units built, but yet the property prices are going up despite the headwinds of inflation and high interest rates. So to me, this inability to look forward and try to make sense of what's going to happen in the next 12 months, to me, that's ugly, because the data is not congruent. It does not fit into the traditional methods of being able to give you any forecast and outlook.
Do you think that's done on purpose?
No idea.
Okay, we'll move on to Jaya on that. Good, the bad, the ugly for you?
Yes, Swee Yong covered quite a lot of the ground very well, and I won't add to his points, but I concur with what he has said by and large. And the good is, with the recalibration because of COVID, many people have taken time off to reevaluate their life and lifestyles. And suddenly, for the first time, they've had time to sit down and ponder and think what it's all about. Otherwise, they were caught up in this rat race, day in, day out, and almost like being on a treadmill without thinking. And so many of them have chosen variations in lifestyle and also attitudes towards work and so on and so forth. This has posed challenges to the employers because a large percentage of, especially the younger employees, Generation Y, Z, and so on, are considering moving portfolio. So there's going to be a lot of churn, and the ability to attract new employees based on your environmental awareness, your progressiveness as a company, the working colleagues you have, management style, and so on, is going to determine who you're able to attract and how you're able to retain them. Another interesting challenge is that those families who have been forced to work at home have now been confined for 2 years within a small space. And that has created its own tensions within families. And that has also caused a number of breakups and so on. And that's a worrying trend. And that's the bad and the ugly part of it. But on the brighter side, people have now understood, employers and employees, that there can be more flexible working arrangements. And but there is also a need, in many a case, to work from a structured framework which the office gives. And that's the dilemma that's facing many an employer. How do you balance the two? Give the employees the freedom to choose and stay with you, and how do you get the structure and the interaction and teamwork going when you're working online? So those are some of the areas that were challenging. On my venture capital side, it was twofold. Some companies which were doing, say, delivery services and online shopping and so on, did extremely well in this period. And so their value went up, their business went up, and they were had more opportunities than ability to deliver in many a case. Other companies died, and their business model just didn't gel. And as Swee Yong pointed out, valuations have come down tremendously in the last year or so. The sky-high expectations have been met with reality, and the reality of closing down was knocking at the door. So valuations have come down. On the more challenging side, raising capital is becoming a lot more difficult now, because many of the funders have been burnt. And looking at the situation worldwide, whether it's geopolitics or inflation or higher interest rates, we know all the paradigms that are involved are all posing challenges to business. And the reality has struck home. I mean, we've been very fortunate to have decades of uninterrupted growth, but I don't think we can take anything for granted. No one ever expected or knew of COVID before it came. And when it hit us, it was a new paradigm that we had to deal with. And on that score, I must say, I think the Singapore government did well overall in handling the situation so that we could very much carry on with life. And the reality, it was very difficult. It's much easier to criticize on hindsight, but being in the hot seat at that point in time with no precedent is not an easy position. And Singapore being such an open economy, we would want to be open to the world as soon as possible. At the same time, if we took too liberal a view, you open yourself to jeopardy. And that is the dilemma they had, but they did open as soon as they could and did it wisely and reduced the risk as far as possible, and we seem to have come through with it. I hope this continues, but one must be prepared for variance and other aspects of it to come through. And fortunately, we didn't have people in high office considering injecting themselves with cleansers like we saw. And that was really embarrassing. So it was measured, it was careful, and I think we did well. That basically covers it for me. And on the consulting side, business kind of dried up during this period, but a lot more assignments came about because companies needed competence on a shorter time frame and at a known cost. So they couldn't employ the professional long-term or afford him, but they could take them on 3 and 6 months or 1 year assignments, get the job done for a specific purpose at a specified cost with the deliverables clearly outlined. And this has become a new trend. So many of the high-powered corporates like CFOs and so on found new employment, multiple jobs, and certainly the technical people also found that opportunity open to them. Yeah, I think that covers it from my end.
Okay. You're talking about essentially the gig economy on the rise, right? Because people are not hiring for the purposes of career anymore. They're hiring to fix a need. So if that's going to be the trend, then what future is there for large organizations or somebody who wants a career in a large organization?
I think the careers will still be there, but this trend will continue. And it's twofold in the sense that companies need more gig workers, and many workers, especially the younger generation now, prefer these stints, not being committed, work for a period, take time off, holiday, travel the world and experience life. They're not so interested in commitments, even from the point of view of tying yourself down with a home and a car or a spouse. So trends are changing, expectations and values are changing. So I think we've got to get ourselves acclimatized with this paradigm and deal with it accordingly.
Okay, so you were talking about the change of attitude, right? With the younger generation, don't necessarily want cars, jobs, fixed careers, spouse. So what will happen, you think, when our generation passes on? I mean, do you see a sea change taking place that's going to sort of throw things about so much that it's going to look very different? Both of you can weigh in on this. Yeah.
I think so. I take myself, for instance, was a career person, was in MNCs, moved the career ladder, worked in multiple countries, but at some point decided I didn't want to have anything more to do with corporate life and the politics that went with it. I prefer doing my own thing, and I'm a lot happier. I work longer hours, but there's no pressure from above. It's self-motivation, and you enjoy doing what you do. Of course, you don't have the comfort of a steady stream of income all the time, but it's a much more realistic situation and a much more adaptable situation, which is in keeping with the times. And I think many people seem to have accepted that as a reality and are coping with that accordingly.
Sriong?
On the point about short-term contracting our work and skills to different organizations, and then you mentioned that the attitude might also be for the spouse. So I'm wondering, moving forward, then how is this new law about the institution of marriage? And then on the other hand, would there be new jobs such as spouse for hire or for baby making, contract manufacturing type of thing going on in future? Because it is, after all, we are moving into a shared economy, right?
Let's see how far the sharing will go.
On Jaya's point about this flexibility that organizations want now, and one of the largest employers in Singapore, probably the number one employer in terms of size in Singapore, has also allowed their office-based workers to have flexibility now, maybe 3.5 days of a week. So if we took an average, there'll be some companies that are, no, you must come in 5 days a week or 5.5 days a week. And then there are companies such as the tech ones that says, okay, you are allowed to work anywhere as long as your deliverables are met. So across this whole spectrum, let's just say that 10% of space in the office, 10% of desks are not needed anymore. At least 7 million square feet of office space in Singapore that's not needed. That would push our current vacancy rate of about 12% to above 20%. And that would bring us a total vacancy of about, 16, 17 million square feet. This is another point where I say that the numbers, Singapore seem to be very resilient, because I can't square off how some of the current valuations of the listed office players are still being held up so high. Whether the valuers will be reevaluating these discount rates as well as the higher interest and inflation this December. So expect a little bit of realism maybe in first quarter next year when they report their end of the year valuations.
As you said in the article in Storm today, Swee Yong, you're looking at other markets like Japan for your businesses. What's the mood like as far as Singapore property is concerned, in terms of how your clients view it?
Yes, so my clients, as recent as yesterday, rentals have gone up. Yes, valuations have gone up. But he's looking at the cost of even getting a contractor in, getting somebody to come in to repaint the property between the tenants moving in and out. And he was saying that the costs have also shot up a lot. Of course, interest costs have gone up, and that ate away whatever is the excess positive cash flow that he had. And then going into next year, he's got to set aside a few $100 more a year for the property tax, as well as GST from the suppliers who are billing him for contractors and all that. So if with fixed deposit rates now being offered at 4%, why does he want to work so hard managing that apartment for rental and earning 0.4% net positive cash after all the expenses, right? And so we discussed, and I'm recommending that he consider investing a bit in Japan. It is, after all, still Tokyo, Osaka, you are probably one of the most developed cities in the world. Nice, clear laws, and with interest rates still at about 1 to 1.5%, depending on how you structure your investments into Japan. So the yield of 4% minus the 1.5% borrowing cost, there is still some positive cash flow coming out. These properties in Singapore, the yield of 4% minus the interest right now, commercial interest rates would be above 4%. Residential interest rates will be 3.5 to 4. So that eats up a lot of your hard work and profits that you wish to earn.
If I can add on to that, Kannan, yeah, there's been exuberance in the Singapore market and has resisted easing off, unlike many other countries around the world. One, because there's a lot of hot money coming in and ultra high net worth individuals coming in, and it's also seen as a stable base, politically stable, economically stable, etc. So it's still sought after. But as Swee Yong correctly points out, the reckoning will start to set in when people realize that their property taxes, their interest rates, and everything is going to affect their ability to sustain investing at that same rate. Plus, rightfully so, I'm also the chairman of one of my condos, and if we took the tough stand of deciding to do our R&R works during COVID, many in the MC felt that we should hold back because this was a bad time, difficulty in getting workers, and the workers, as much as 30 or 35 of them on site, could pose a potential infection rate. But we didn't have that issue. They were very disciplined, and they were always tested before they left their dormitories. But it meant that today the same project would cost 40 to 50% more to do. And that is worrying, because where you never plan for this in your costing at the management committee level or at the managing agent level, and where do you get the extra funds? Do you collect more from the residents? Are they in a position to continue paying, etc., etc.? So these are practical realities that have hit the ugly side of the market.
Yeah, so the other thing, with with that in mind, any idea how much more people are going to be spending next year than they did this year, just in general living? The rise of utilities, the cost of utilities, GST kicking in, general rise of cost of goods and services out there. Any indication of how much more people will wind up spending next year and even the year after that?
For myself, based on my sometimes hawker center, sometimes Holland Village restaurant, and I don't own a car, thankfully, so I'm not subject to the very high petrol prices. But then, of course, my utilities bills have gone up. The MCST bill has gone up because of higher wage costs, higher contractors costs, as well as in general electricity and water costs of the common areas. I would say my monthly is going to be $300 more a month, which is not too much, because I think I'm still on public transport most of the time, and I can save back that $300 a month if I cut down on my visits to the pubs for World Cup.
Ah, okay. Jaya, any views on that?
I think there's going to be an element of society that's going to be a little bit more cautious, because they're going to feel the pinch with these increases in costs. Fortunately for our part of the world, we don't have a situation with winter. It's going to hit the Western European and Canadian, US, South American economies a lot harder, because the cold is a reality, but do you have the extra funds to heat yourself up during this period? And to many people, that's going to, and it's going to become a very tough situation simply because of the energy crisis and the politics with Russia. Europe is going to find it very, very tough. And this has given the rise to populist politics, because the man in the street is suddenly, his pocket is hit, but he votes with his feet. And so you get these populist governments coming into place. And whether that's best for the long-term interest of the country is left to be seen. My view is that it is unlikely to be the case. Certainly in many countries, especially in Europe, spending has gone down a great deal simply because they're paying much more for petrol and utilities and so on.
Do you see some of the bigger brands succumbing down the line? There might be certain brands that are not like ultra high luxury brands, for instance. They seem to be impervious because people with money will still be there and they're reaching a small group. But sort of the middle tier brands that reach, they sort of straddle those who want to have it and those who can maybe afford it, but it's a considered decision. Do you think some of them might start falling off as well?
I think so too, simply because, as you pointed out, if they're straddling, that puts them in an undefined space. So how do you get your unique selling proposition, and how do you position yourself to be a wanted item or a desired item or highly sought after? And that middle ground, when you can't distinguish yourself and you've got no distinguishing factors, makes you very vulnerable. And when there is so much competition, plus the fact that the retail environment is challenged by online shopping and so on, you have to keep yourself relevant, and all the paraphernalia that goes around it, like your support mechanism with using social media, your marketing and so on. Some of these older organizations have older mindsets because their management is made that way, but the marketplace has changed and they do not see that change. Neither are they prepared to embrace that change, and to that extent they'll become casualties.
Just with the simple observation of the regular coffee stalls I visit in around Commonwealth area, when the whole neighborhood starts to tighten belts, even if you were to absorb the GST increase, your kopio is still $1. You might have fewer patrons as compared to the past, but then the overheads remain similar. Every month $600 per stall for the cleaning services, every month's rental to NEA, which is another few $100, and then you add up the electricity and the water bills. And so with fewer patrons and patrons tightening their belts around, well, at least that's what I observed from the Tanglin Halt Commonwealth area, quite a lot of lower income families around there. The storeholders are finding it tough because some basic overheads can't be reduced. Yeah, and so strangely then, because GST is going up in January, this month you will see consumer spend numbers spiking, because if you can buy and keep canned food or rice, you would buy it in advance, right, before the GST goes up. And then again, it is a few months of good, nice numbers. Oh, consumer spend has gone up year on year, especially because last year we were still in semi-lockdown mode. And then all this very rosy news that is completely contrasted against reality when you walk around the 1 and 2 room HDB flats locations. It's very jarring. I find it totally disconcerting.
Okay, before we get to the questions, I just have one question I want to ask regarding the point you just raised about data. There's a lot of data, and data can be interpreted to suit the needs of whoever wants to say what they want to say. Is there a lot of that is perhaps not giving people the full picture of what's taking place? Do you think there's too much reliance on this data, and it's like a fallback? No, the data says it, so therefore you just accept that as a gospel truth. Should we question the use of data a lot more?
At the first instance, I think we should all question the headlines, and then we should question the summaries that come with most of these data releases, whether it's from government sources or it's from private sector surveys, and especially from our mainstream media, the headlines as well as the lead up to the article. Then let's get into the actual content itself, and let's reflect on them as we read them. And better still, if they refer to a certain source, go to the source, find out the definition. So if the source say this is coming from SingStat, this is coming from Ministry of Manpower, let's go to the source and let's read the source rather than read what somebody else has interpreted for you. And that will give us a better idea. But to say that there might be alternative data outside of our government's data collection, it is very tough. I don't see that coming at all.
No, it wasn't so much that, but the interpretation, more the interpretation of data. Yeah,
Yeah.
sorry, Jay. Yeah.
On that score, in relation to your question and Suyong's observation, I think we are facing a much more discerning populace who's able to do their own research and come up with alternate views. And that is a challenge that sources that give out this data, be it government or any other think tank or whatever it is, have to be credible and respected and recognized, because the moment that is removed, people will start questioning the data or ignoring the data because they say you have an angle to peddle and you're peddling it. So it's very important to get the right data and come across as being credible and acceptable in terms of your research findings, because statistics can always be skewed to meet a requirement. Are you doing it honestly? And people are smart enough these days to know one from the other.
Yes, it could be that we need to be prepared for more spikes and troughs in this world now. Things used to be moving at a slower pace now. Things are not just moving faster, but the peaks and troughs of whether it's economic cycles or it is something that such as natural disasters or whatever affects the climate. As long as the daily swing in temperature is, let's say, 20 degrees, where maybe in the past century, the daily swing is only 15 degrees. Now your daily max and minimum is 20. What about the difference between winter and summer temperatures? So Black Swan, yes, expect that there could be more, something out of the unknown hitting us more regularly. The other part might be that according to some astrologers, both on the eastern and the western side, that this whole universe is moving through a change in the era from the Earth era, which is very practical, manufacturing-based type of thinking, where structures work, formulas work, to very much more an air era where fluidity, think about Tai Chi as opposed to a Taekwondo type of, you want something very fluid versus you want something very formularized and hard. So that's another explanation, not from the real estate angle, but for your consideration.
Well, sure, why not? We should be open-minded enough to take all the things that come our way, right?
I think for starters, Asian companies have to flatten their structures. When I was doing work for the HDB, they were wondering why their customer service was not good. And they had 13 levels, which is incredible. And the lowest in that level was the receptionist. And guess where she gets her power from? Telling customers to get lost, you didn't bring the right documents. Being difficult because she's been pressed on by 13 levels above her. The chairman's office had a special lift, and the carpet was so thick that you sunk in it when going up to his office. So, even Singapore Airlines can flatten itself. I say this because having worked with Scandinavian companies, they're a lot flatter. And when I did a project with Indivo Consulting, and we were turning around Scandinavian Airlines, they brought a new MD from a smaller regional aircraft company who did very well to take over the company. And the middle management, many of them were ex-Air Force pilots, were blocking from the top management information going down and vice versa from the bottom. And he said the middle management just keeps themselves busy with cover my ass notes to justify their position. He got so pissed off with them, he moved his office to the airport and dealt with the front line. And his was not a traditional triangular structure with top management on top. He believed in two concentric circles, top management, direct line to the front line, so that there was no interface and disturbance from middle management. And I think that's something that we've got to get used to, flatter structures, empowering the people in the front line to make decisions. Two things here: management must let go its reins, allow them to make decisions and allow them to make mistakes. As long as they don't make too many mistakes repeatedly of the same type, they are doing the right thing. And same with the frontline people. One of the problems that many multinationals experience with Singapore employees is that they don't take on responsibility and taking on decision making. They're very good in a structured situation being told what to do. But I think that paradigm has shifted where you have to take decisions and make those judgment calls. And that goes for government as well. We were great in the past of taking best practice from Japan, Europe, and the US, and very good at implementing. Because it was a strict society, if $100 was allocated to a project, $100 went to the project, unlike many of our neighboring countries. But on today, you are in the starting block with the developed countries, and you have to be able to make those decisions on the ground. And by definition, some of the decisions you make will be wrong simply because there's no precedent and you don't know what the future is holding, but you've got to take those risks. And to that extent, I feel that there should be more Philip Yeos in government who are empowered to make the decisions and are given a free rein to some extent. But if you always penalize civil servants for getting it wrong and not rewarding them for getting it right, then what is their behavior pattern going to be? And that is a paradigm that we've got to cross.
So on that note, would you agree with the extra bonus that civil servants are getting?
I don't have too much of a problem myself, but there are two issues here. One, generally that civil servants have facilitated where Singapore has got to, but they have got to be accountable, like in the private sector. You draw a high salary in the private sector, you're nearer the door. The moment you fault, out you go. No questions asked, no ceremonies. But in the case of civil servants, they have a protective mechanism. And I would like to see them being more empowered. A few of the younger ministers show those traits. But I'd like to see it in the middle ground. The middle ground is where the change has got to take place, and they've got to be more empowered, and they must be willing to take the decisions. They're very happy to take down decisions because they can push it back and say, it was not my decision, someone told me to do it. But you need that when you become a developed country.
So to add on to that, civil service is so wide, right? I agree that many of them actually have pulled their weight, especially those in the healthcare and public security sector. But then even within the public security sector, we had such long periods of semi-lockdown, restricted movement. For example, how much work did the traffic guys take on? You need more people to write tickets. So it's not. And then what about those who, for example, failed to get us the correct food supply or the correct toilet paper supply? So should we actually reward everybody?
Yeah, that's the thing, right? That's a tough one to get into with such a short, limited amount of time, but I certainly begs the question of whether it should be sort of a blanket payout or it should be measured based on performance. And as for the car guys you were talking about, well, they made a lot on COE still, despite not having many cars on the road. So, you know, on that front, the money is still flowing in somehow.
I would expect that a lot more crime that is a little bit more sophisticated, such as fraud, scam, cheating cases. Maybe Singapore is not really the place of crime by snatching or by burglary, right? And then maybe due to the more depressed type of environment for the lower income groups, then the reliance on drugs or mental health issues causing somebody to then do something wrong. It maybe is an inadvertent sort of crime due to him suffering from something else, right? I think we should expect such things to increase, especially next year.
Certainly, mental anguish is up there, right? It's on the rise.
So Zainab's question, going back to the topic today, I agree with Suyong that this is probably one of the characteristics of 2022 was the level of scams and frauds that took place. I think the populace has got to be more vigilant, and sometimes living in a very safe society, you put your guard down, and you get taken for a ride in the process. So one has got to adjust to that, and I think a lot more public education has to be done. And I'd like to see stronger enforcement action against these scammers, and they be thrown behind bars. But that's not enough of that taking place, because these guys still continue to persist and perpetuate these crimes, because it can be very painful for people to lose their savings and so on. It affects their lifestyle going forward. It affects their family relationships and so on and so forth. So we don't want these unnecessary situations taking place.
Do you also include in your statement the SGX companies like Eagle Hospitality or High Flux, as well as the underwriting suppliers, for example?
Yeah,
The question
that's thrown at you.
Yes, for Jaya, because there are many people who get caught wrong-footed from investing in the stock market based on what is claimed by the listed companies as well, so or by their underwriting banks, right? So maybe those are even more sophisticated type of inadvertent crime, perhaps.
I think one has got to be very wary of any statements that are coming out. And my own view is that High Flux should have been brought to task a long time earlier. And the day of reckoning should have been upfront, instead of allowing to drag so long, and the price paid becomes bigger for society as a whole. But there are some semblances of watchdogs being set up, but not strong enough yet. Some industry societies, but they are in the nascent stages and taken up by well-meaning individuals, but they are not given the full force of the law and so on and so forth. So I'd like to see these agencies take on a bigger role and given more support from the government and the people.
Okay. All right. So we've reached the mark, the 1:30 mark. I just wanted to ask each of you what you would like to see as a good coming up in 2023. Suyong?
I would wish that we have already gotten real immunity, and that this really passes off as a common flu, and this immunity gets us through another 10 years without a significant bout of pandemic again. So that would be the best blessing, because then with good health, that really allows for everything else to move forward.
Okay. Jeff?
Yeah. I'm in agreement with Suyong, and I'd like to see less disruptions as possible, but I think that's going to be the order of the day. I think Singapore and ASEAN and this part of the world, I think, has got a bright future with 600 million plus people, with lifestyles and expectations going up and the middle class developing. I think it's a good place to be, but we've got to position ourselves right and be a hub to harness these opportunities. And Singaporeans as well, when it's comfortable, like in Japan, Japanese don't like to go out of the country. Singaporeans also resist that. And they should be more adventurous and create the opportunity and go out to these places. Let's not forget that Indonesia is going to be the 4th largest economy in the world. That is something spectacular. And, many of us don't want to go and work down there because they think it's a backward place, but it is moving on progressively. It's taken on great strides, and the region is looking interesting from that perspective, and we should embrace it.
Okay. On Indonesia, they just introduced this rule about extramarital regulation. You can't have extramarital affairs. That's punishable a year in prison, right? So that might do something to their tourism trade because it's across the board. Anybody in the country is subject to
Oh,
it.
but conversely, the short-term weddings industry might spike up.
Yes, the shotguns.
Yeah, and I think it's put on the back burner for 3 years. It's not going to be implemented right away.
Yes, yes.
And I'm hoping they're probably going to shelve it to some extent. But that is the challenge with Indonesia as well. It's got fantastic potential simply because 270 million people is a huge base. And it will rank after China, US, India, and be number 4 economy in the world in 2050. But the Muslim challenge is a big one, and it has to be handled carefully with good leadership to show alternatives, because the ground is being worked on by them to get this Sharia law and Islamization. And thank God that Anwar came into office in Malaysia, so that's been put on hold for the moment. But the statistics and the prevalence of that happening has not gone away. The challenge is in 2032, what will happen in those elections. So I hope he can deliver and the population can be educated to move forward in the right direction.
Okay, great. All right, we covered a lot of ground in this 45 minutes, many things to think about. Thank you, Swee Yong and Jaya, for your views, frank, honest, some of them. And I think and to the questions from the audience as well, the whole idea of good, bad, and ugly, it'll persist, it'll prevail. Life is like that. But hopefully we learn from the goods and from the bads and the uglies as well, and try and make them all a bit better down the line. So hope to see you guys on the 21st when we look at 2023 and what's to come. Meanwhile, thank you. Thanks for joining the session.